streaming and entertainment is extremely personalized now. There's something out there for everybody, and you don't have to watch what's on the family room TV. You can kind of watch your own thing.
Win all in, play my cards right. Up the ante, one blackjack all night. Roll the dice, let it ride. Water the odds, I got snake eyes.
This podcast exists because of the team at CADCM. At CADCM, we make content creation enjoyable. We are on a mission to help leaders create content that will improve lives, content to be proud of, content that fosters community. We know through firsthand experience how content brings people together, and we love helping make that happen. We produce podcasts, short form videos, blog posts, and other written works, while also providing support in website development, social media management, and strategic planning. And we would be excited to help you. Visit cadcm.com to learn more, or feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn or Twitter. Rich, good to see you. The thing that we talk about a lot is entrepreneurship, obviously, right?
Mm-hmm.
But in my mind, there's different forms of it, right? There's this entrepreneurial mindset, and then there's this whole freelancer economy, and there's this creative economy. And that's where I want to go today with you.
Okay.
Is you can be an employee of a company, right? And you can do amazing things, and you can love your job and do all that.
Mm-hmm.
You can also still be a creator.
Sure.
So real quick, just give us a background on what you do on a daily basis for work. Then we'll get to the next part of it. So start there.
Yeah, sure. So I am a customer service manager for a company that distributes paper packaging and facility supply. It's really boring.
Okay.
To boil it down, I sell toilet paper. So,
Okay.
so everybody, and packaging products. So
Yeah.
I kind of equate it to hey, if you ever watch The Office and Dunder Mifflin, it's that in that instance, but it's a great job. It's a great company. In Jacksonville, we were just voted #1 place to work in Jacksonville through the Florida Times-Union, the local paper here. So very proud of where I work. We have great people. I got a great team and a lot of tenure, and that's what I do to pay the bills, right?
Yeah.
So I'm lucky enough to enjoy the flexibility of doing my podcast on top of doing my day job, which, my day job kind of feeds the podcast, right? Because my podcast isn't quite monetized as of yet. But yeah, I've been in customer service for a long time, and one of those weird people that enjoy it and enjoy dealing with customers. So yeah, that's what I do for my day job.
Yeah. You just said it. You feed the creative. And you said it's not monetized yet. And I would almost say, I don't know if I agree with it. Yes, directly monetized, you see the money in the bank account, perhaps not, right? But it's in a way, maybe not the word's not monetized, because that's a buzzword, no doubt. But every time I've spoken to you, or I've seen you, or I've heard you, or I've listened to your podcast, you're very positive, right? You have a positive mindset. You seem very calm. You're very relaxing to talk to, right? These are all positive attributes for an individual to have. And I would imagine you're that way no matter what. But I would also imagine that allowing yourself to go to that creative space makes you feel better about how the days are going. Am I right on that?
Yeah. I mean, to have this outlet to, podcasts are a dime a dozen, right? I mean, there's tons of podcasts out there.
Yeah.
But this gives me a creative outlet to, I don't paint, I don't draw. I'm not those traditional artistic, I don't have those artistic abilities.
Yeah.
But talking about things that I love and things that I like with friends and people that I like is really fun for me. And I just enjoy it. And it just helps me, it helps me deal with life in general. Because right now, man, the world is just going to hell in a handbasket, and it's just not fun to be in. So this gives me that outlet to be able to have some fun on my daily life and meet great people and just enjoy it.
Yeah.
But yeah, I'm fairly positive all the time.
Yeah.
I don't let a lot of things bother me. I try not to. I mean, I feel like you have two choices in life. You could stress about it or not stress about it, and stressing about it doesn't really help. So yeah, I kind of have that positive outlook on life in general.
Yeah. I think that creative outlet's right. I mean, because to be an artist, if I was facing the other way, my mom's an artist, and I have a banner that she did behind me oftentimes when I'm talking, but I've rearranged some things. But anyway, you don't have to be that. You could be a writer, right? I've seen authors come from the place of they were journaling, right? They were just writing. They would get in the practice of writing. Mm-hmm. You've talked before, right? You just didn't start talking yesterday on the podcast. You've done it before. You've done it for years, right? That is a creative place. Writing's a creative place. Entrepreneurship in many ways can be a creative place to be, because you're building something from scratch. And I think there's art involved in that, right? Obviously, there's very business skills, there's technical skills, there's science, there's whatever, math. But I think this creative place is an important place to be for a lot of people. And oftentimes we'll say, hey, if you're a founder or CEO, you're dealing with stress and all this and that. That's everybody. It's not just, oh, only the CEO or the founder can deal with it. No. It's an employee of a company can deal with that. A manager of a company can deal with that. And you said it. You said two things, right? You said, it's boring what I do, or the job, not the work, but the company and what we sell. But at the same time, that was brief, and everything else you said was very positive about it. So I get the sense, and you said tenure, you've been there a long time. This matters to you. That job matters to you, and you do enjoy it. And I think those are important things. And then okay, so how can I apply this, and how can I do other things? Because we all do other things. We're not just, oh, what do you do, Rich? Oh, I do this. That doesn't define who you are. You have interest across the board, right? You have interest in food. You write, or you've written articles in regards to the culinary cuisine, right? Jacksonville food, reviews, and all that kind of stuff. TV shows, streaming. There's a lot of interest that you have. And I think the main thing is anyone can do this. But the question then I have is, when you said, what did that look like to say, I think I want to start a podcast? Before we even get into what other people are going to think, when did this idea come to be to say, I think I should have a podcast?
Well, it's kind of weird. I watched The Bear season 1 in October of 22. So I was about, 4 or 5 months late to that show.
Yeah.
But I started hearing a lot about it. And I do write about food. I'm freelance food writer here in Jacksonville, Florida. So I write about food, and I really love food, and I like pop culture. So The Bear was this perfect kind of mesh, because it captured the imagination of a lot of people, and a lot of people loved the show, and people were talking about it. So I thought, all right, let me sit down and watch it. So I watched it, and I loved the show. And after I finished the season, I was like, God, I want to talk about it with somebody. And I want to talk about it with a chef that has been in the kitchen, and be like, all right, how real is this show? I've read think pieces about The Bears, oh yeah, it's the most realistic depiction of a kitchen, a professional kitchen in media. So I was like, all right, let me talk to one of my chef friends and see how real it really is. And I reached out to some folks, and one guy said, yeah, and we recorded it. And, I don't know anything about editing or anything like that. I was a broadcasting major in college back in the 90s, where I was still cutting reel-to-reel tapes with a razor blade and tape. So doing it digitally was all new to me, but I had a lot of fun on that podcast. I was like, man, this could be something I could do, a little hobby of mine. I have no illusions of grandeur of this being the next big thing.
Sure.
It's just a fun outlet for me, that if I watch something that I like, there's got to be somebody out there that likes it too and wants to talk about it.
Yeah.
So that's kind of how it started. And I'm the Eat Your Content podcast. I'm 37 episodes. I just uploaded one this morning. So I'm 37 episodes deep. I do episodic recaps of Top Chef and any food show that just piques my imagination. I'll go back and watch old foodie TV shows and movies and talk about those. I also focus on local chefs and talking about their stories. So it's just a lot of fun, and something that I thought, I think a podcast would be fun. I thought, well, I'll write about it. And I said, well, writing about it's one thing, but being able to talk about it in the moment and kind of off the cuff is another. So I've been enjoying my ride. I've been doing this for about a year now, so it's been a lot of fun.
Yeah, you said it, in the moment. I was actually thinking that when you're doing this, you're just focused on the now, right?
Yep.
You're focused on that, watching the show, talking about it, thinking about it, having that conversation. And you said it right at the end, in the moment. I would imagine that's part of the enjoyment that you get. Maybe you don't even consciously think about it, but that is what's happening. Is that right?
Yeah, I mean, I don't even script out my podcast. I'll have a general outline, but we'll end up going wherever the conversation goes.
Yeah.
I generally, even when I do interview-based podcast, I've interviewed a documentarian for Netflix's Poisoned documentary.
Okay.
It was a lot of fun. And I had an outline, but we just kind of went where it went. We ended up talking about, food and politics. And it was just a really interesting conversation that was birthed out of that. And, I ended up tossing my notes about halfway through, and we just went with it.
Yeah.
So I'm not as polished as maybe some of those podcasts that have been out there for a while, but I think it's fun. It's conversational, and I think people would enjoy it.
Yeah. Have you seen leverage from the shows? Okay. What kind of leverage have you seen?
Well, I haven't had anybody reach out to me saying, hey, I've listened to your podcast. I'd love to be a guest. I don't think I'm quite there yet. I'm still in the growth stage, but me reaching out to people, I've been really surprised at who I've been able to get on my podcast for the short amount of time I've had it. And honestly, for the number of listeners that I have, I don't have thousands of followers yet. But I do some research. If I find an email address, I'll cold email them or I'll slip into their DMs. And one podcast I did a retrospective on 2015's Waiting movie. I don't know if you've ever seen Waiting, or not 2015, 2005. It was a while back.
That was a while ago, yeah.
Yeah.
I'm gonna look
It was
it
like
up.
Ryan Reynolds' one of his first movies after Van Wilder and right before Blade Trinity and all that. But I looked up the writer and director because that movie's hilarious. It's about, a wait staff at a fictional restaurant. It's kind of a hangout movie like Mall Clerks, right?
Yeah.
But it's all centered around a restaurant. And I found the writer and director, and he was on Facebook, and I just cold DM'd him, and he answered me like later that day. And he's like, man, I haven't thought about that movie in like decades.
Wow.
I'd love to be on your podcast. And I thought that was an awesome get, just to have that guy, a writer director of the movie, talking about that movie and just the crazy shenanigans that went on behind the scenes. And like with Top Chef recaps, I was able to get a runner-up and a winner from Top Chef season 20, which I thought was really interesting and fun to hear their behind the scenes of the show and filming it. And again, I just cold DM'd people and kind of put it out there. And if they answered, great. If not,
Yeah. No, that's a big deal, right? And I would say to anybody, yourself or anyone listening, if they're thinking of starting a podcast or have one and they don't have a huge audience, it doesn't matter, right? Because it doesn't take a long time. It doesn't. And the fact that you have one, you become the local media or the national media for that matter. Because to have these illusions, use your word, that this is going to be like millions of followers or thousands of followers, it's really hard to do. And is that really the end game? Like, I think when someone sits back, I'm not saying it isn't, it can be. There's so much more that comes from it. I promise anybody that gives it a try, and this is not me trying to convince someone, it's just like if they're thinking about it, because there's psychological stops from people doing it at all, right? They're just like, nah, no one's going to listen. This is me stupid. What am I going to say? No one cares and I get it, right? We've all been there. Even if it was 10 people or 100 people or 1,000 people, whatever that is, it's really hard to monetize that directly, meaning like someone's going to a brand's going to call you up, we want to sponsor. Even if they did, the number could be very low. But the leverage that you gain to have that conversation with the director of Waiting, as an example, maybe that means nothing to someone else, but it means something to you. And then the conversation itself and learning how to communicate better and listening and asking better questions, or just like the fact that you're like talking to this individual that you otherwise would not have been able to talk to had it not been for the podcast. I think it's a major deal and an opportunity, and it allows you to be focused on the conversation, no different than you and I are doing right now. At least that's what I'm doing. I think that's what you're doing, right? That type of mindset, I've never experienced it, maybe once or twice. I'm trying to think, where the other person on the other end wasn't dialed in, right?
Yeah.
And that's early on in the game. Maybe you're like, okay, how did I get this person, right? Whatever. But in saying that, like, were there blocks? Were there things stopping you to say, maybe I shouldn't do this? Or people said something like, oh, we're rich, really? You have a podcast? Like, why?
I mean, there were some mental blocks there. There was those initial things like, oh, who's going to listen, right? And nobody cares about, me or my viewpoint. And I had to get to the mindset of, I'm doing this for me. I'm doing this because this is what I like to do. I'm going to talk about the things I like to talk about, interview people that I want to interview. And they may not be big time people, but these are people that I enjoy talking to or that I want to talk to or get to know. So there was those initial barriers of, am I going to find the time? Am I going to be able to afford it? I thought, okay, well, it's got to be expensive to run a podcast. And come to find out, not so much. I mean, there's a lot of free tools out there for people that are hobbyist podcasters like me. The barrier of entry is really low now. And I think if you keep in mind that doing it for yourself and talk about the things you like to talk about, because if you like to talk about it, somebody probably likes to listen to it. And there's an audience out there for you at some point.
Yeah.
You'll catch on somewhere at some point, or you may not. But this is, like I said earlier, a hobby for me, something that I enjoy. And I've met really cool people and made really neat connections over the course of the year that I've done this.
Yeah.
Would actual direct monetization be great for me? Sure. But luckily I have a great day job that I like going to every day. And luckily I work from home that allows me to kind of the flexibility to be able to do this and take an hour out of my day and do this kind of thing and have those podcasts, and I have a very understanding boss that says, man, go for it. And what's cool is, I've been able to parlay my podcast and promote it within my work network. Like we put out a quarterly magazine for internal employees, and they said, hey, we heard you have a podcast. It'd be a really interesting article. And so I got to talk about my podcast with people that I work with. And I normally don't because, I try to keep my work life separate from everything else. And but they're like, oh man, I'm going to listen to it. And it's, I picked up a few listeners from work, and it's been fun to be able to talk about that. So just those barriers, if you can get over those humps of being afraid to put yourself out there and afraid of what people will think, it's not going to be for everybody, but you just got to move past that and just do it once. Once that first domino falls, I think the rest of it just becomes easier and being able to put yourself out there more.
Yeah. And to that story about getting featured in company magazine, right? Companies are made of people. Board of directors are made of people.
Yeah.
And these people have interest, right? Like a company that I used to work for, the CEO was a Duke graduate, went to Duke MBA, loved Duke basketball, right? Recording this the day after Duke loses. But
that's right.
And whatever that thing is, they might be into travel, they might be into food, they might be into streaming shows on Netflix, they might be into who knows what, technology and robots, and the list goes on. That's the interest level. So that is the gateway to having that conversation. If someone loves coffee, like you like coffee and you talk about coffee and that person listens to it, and let's say you happen to be, I don't know, an attorney, a customer service rep, a real estate agent, like those are the door openers, because it's such an easier thing to then say, oh, well, yeah, we get each other. And I can learn about that individual before we ever communicate. So I think that's really cool. And I think it even helps in a work environment at a very simple, it doesn't have to be a business thing. It could be a relational thing almost, right? Like, oh, I heard your podcast, Rich. That's really cool that you're doing that. I love that show. And next thing you know, you have a conversation. It's the ultimate icebreaker, right?
Exactly.
We built that on the sports side of things a long time ago and said, sports is the ultimate icebreaker. Now it's evolved into so much more, as all these things do. And you see what your interest level is, to say, hey, it's very easy. If someone walked in here with any team on, jersey, logo, whatever, we can have a conversation about it. And we might never have met before, but that gets the conversation going. And next thing you know, you're talking about who knows what, right? And I think there's a lot in there. And speaking of interest, like was food always been in your life? Obviously food's been in your life, but like to that level, to want to write about it and do reviews and then to talk about it and watch shows about it, right? It's obviously embedded in all that, what you do every day.
I mean, yeah, you don't get to be a person at my size without loving food, right? So I love to eat at a very young age.
Yeah.
No. I guess when I really didn't get into like the writing about food and doing food reviews, I think until I moved to Jacksonville. And Jacksonville's kind of the biggest city I've ever lived in. I lived in a lot of small towns, Savannah, kind of small town and all those things. But I wasn't much of a foodie until about 10 years ago or so. And we moved to Jacksonville, and there's a lot of great restaurants here. And I started like posting pictures and writing Facebook posts. And, my sister and some other friends like, oh, you should start a blog. And so I started kind of researching that. And I found a local Jacksonville foodie blog. And I cold emailed the guy that runs it and says, hey, are you looking for writers? And he's like, yeah, send me some samples. I did. And I've been doing that ever since. So that's where I kind of really got interested in food and kind of connecting with the local restaurant folks here and writing and interviewing chefs and writing pieces about them and that sort of thing. And so probably, about 10 years ago till now, just really more concentrated into food than I think I've ever been before. So I've kind of started looking at food as more of a event and more than just sustenance, more than just to survive the day, but more of an event and something you look forward to going to. I've had opportunities to go to tasting menu restaurants that I normally wouldn't have even thought of 10 years ago. But, being in a place that has those types of things, really kind of opens your mind to other cuisines. And it's been really great. And I've enjoyed it. And then that kind of parlayed me into the pop culture side of things, of watching my love of food and then watching food on TV with things like Top Chef and things like, like Chopped and dramas about food and that sort of thing. And then that parlayed into, the podcasting gig. Yeah. So one thing kind of led to the other. So it's been an interesting journey for the last 10 years.
You mentioned those tasting events and some other things like that. Did that come about based on just because you're in it or because you're invited to it, because they want people like you at those types of events? How did that come to be?
A little bit of both.
Okay.
I'd get invites to some things to say, hey, if you'll do a feature on us, we'd love to invite you out to a tasting menu
Yeah.
restaurant or tasting menu night. And other times I'm in it and I see an interesting place and I'll just go, right?
Yeah.
So most of the time I'll just go like a regular customer and eat and write and post it, and that's really about it. But
Yeah.
yeah, I'll get invites from time to time. Those are fun.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, that's the leverage that I was talking about, right? Like things that you
Yeah.
wouldn't have otherwise known about, or because you have this, because you write about it, because you talk about it. Someone's like, hey, Rich, we would like you here. Please do a feature on us. It's on us, that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Like that matters, right? Like if that's an interest of somebody, like that's another reason to create this type of content. I mean, it could become a business, it could become a hobby, it could become any of those things.
Sure.
And even if it's not, and if you develop it into a business, like you actually have an LLC or incorporate it or something along those lines, you have expenses, right? You buy your microphone, your technology equipment, your whatever that you need, the food that you're tasting, like all that stuff. If it's a legitimate business that's trying to earn money, there's potential, and you talk to accountants and all that kind of stuff about it, but it can become a tax deduction, right? So all of a sudden your hobby is more of a business now.
Right.
You can't just do it and make believe like it's got to be done legitimately and set up your bank accounts and all that kind of stuff. But that's something else that you can do. So, well, let me stick on this for a second because I was just thinking about it. The food industry, I might have heard of Poisoned. I think you mentioned that before, but there's tons of documentaries about food and all this kind of stuff. So food industry is interesting. I was just in Europe recently. I know because we couldn't connect at some point because I was gone for a couple weeks. And we all know this, right? But in our country, in the US, there's food dyes. There's things that they do not use overseas, right? So as you're more embedded in this in culture than I am, as far as like writing for it and having content about it, like, do you have any takes on that? Have you heard anything like even for allergies, right? Like my wife has celiac and two of my daughters do too. So gluten-free is a big thing. So when you go to a restaurant, certain cities and certain restaurants are better at it than others. Some of them just like, we don't know what you're talking about. It's the first time we're hearing of this. In other places, they ask you any food allergies, and there's lists of food allergies, right? And it's changed over the years. So people are just catching up on it. What's your take on all that?
I think in the United States, we're much more corporate driven than I think other countries are.
Yeah.
So I think those things that you find that are banned in Europe but are allowed in the United States is really just profit driven, right?
Yeah.
Because it's more expensive for companies to not have, I don't know, making this up, red dye number 5 or whatever the case is. It's more expensive to do that than it is to not do that.
Right.
And for America, I just think it's just profit. I think it's just profit driven. I think when I was talking to the documentarian for Poison, that's what he was saying a lot of, because he was a food attorney and food activist.
Okay.
And a lot of the cases that he would take on were just because the company didn't care about people, they cared about profits. One of the biggest cases he had was the Georgia Peanut Company, I think is what it was called, where instead of taking the time to say, hey, these peanuts are bad, they're going to kill people, he spent more time trying to cover it up and ended up killing people. And if he spent that time covering it up and that money covering it up to actually doing what's right, it would have been fine, but he didn't. And I think you see a lot of companies that are like that just kind of do it and wait to see what happens. But I think more companies nowadays are a little bit more social conscious and trying to do better because people's wallets talk, right? And they're looking for companies that have a better social outlook on life in general. So yeah, I mean, that's my very amateurish take on those sort of things. Yeah.
Yeah, it's hard. I don't know what we do about it, right? Because we can't expect things to change, right? Like it's related, unrelated, right? Like they don't teach finance in school.
No.
Typically. They teach math, they teach us. But at the same time, especially in this era of probably the last, 15 years, especially now, if you want to learn finance, you can learn finance, right? I get it. It's not in school. It's not between the hours of 8 and 3. You go on YouTube, you can read books about it. I mean, Warren Buffett's published books, right? There's countless things that you can do to learn. So it takes extra effort to do those things.
Yep.
And that's time consuming. Not everyone has a lot of time, right? All that kind of stuff. No different in food. You don't have to eat that food, or you can research it more. You can spend more time with it. So they actually do teach nutrition in school and even at high level private schools or whatever that might be. But it's so funny because the food pyramid really, in many respects, from what I've seen, has not changed, or at least at some schools, it hasn't changed. Like dairy's a major issue for a lot of people, yet it's still one of the major food groups, which is very interesting when to think like, and there's documentaries on dairy alone, right? So, and that culture's changed, but we can all spend more time researching it, learning about it, having conversations about it, having amateurish takes. Like that's okay, because amateurs, you just said that your take was like, you've talked to people in the industries, you've watched stuff about it, you can put together your own thoughts. And it's hard because you go to a restaurant, right? And the whole point is they want you to eat it, like it, pay for it,
Yep.
come back many, many
Mhm.
times. So the
Mhm.
food has to taste really good. So there's more salt, there's more sugar, there's more butter, there's more of these things. Like, be aware. So I guess the question is like, do you cook at home as well? Or are you a foodie like only when you go out?
Oh no, I cook at home. I'm a halfway decent cook at the
Yeah.
house.
Yeah.
I do what I can. I have things that make it easier. Like I have a sous vide machine. I don't know if you're familiar with sous
No.
vide, but it's sous vide is a way of cooking where you sous vide is French for under vacuum. So you put your food, like you season your food and you put it in a vacuum seal bag, stick it in water, and then this machine heats the water at a precise temperature and holds your food there for long periods of time.
Oh, wow.
So like for a medium rare steak, medium rare is like 131 degrees. You set the temperature of the water to 131 and it'll hold the steak there until you're ready to cook it. It takes a little longer, but it makes it idiot proof. So I'm probably a better cook than I have any right to be because of that kind of
That's all right.
technology.
Yeah.
But I do cook at home. Been cooking at home a lot lately. Just my wife had some surgery, so we haven't been able to go out to eat as much. And the doctor said, you got to eat a lot of high protein foods. And so I've been looking at labels a lot more than I usually have just to make sure that,
Yeah.
she's getting the nutrients needed to heal properly after the surgery and everything. And I'm like, oh man, I didn't realize this had this much protein or had this little protein in it. So I've been a little bit more conscious of food labels recently. But yeah, I cook at home. I enjoy it. That's another kind of hobby of mine. I do have a set of kind of expensive chef knives that I feel like make me a better cook, but I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah.
But it's fun. And sometimes I love, just chopping stuff just to end the day. It's kind of cathartic for me in that sense. So
yeah. It goes back to all the stuff that you're talking about before, right? Like if you're having a podcast and you're having this conversation, you're focused on in the moment. There's this knife that we have, set of knives, and I was cutting veggies, but I never used this knife. I don't know why. So I just pulled it out and just even cutting scallions, like, wait, this is way better. This is like actually enjoy this. So no,
Exactly.
I totally agree with you that there's something to be said in that and having these interests and these hobbies. And if it's not every hobby and every interest has to be a business, it's not that. They can be. And if it's something that you want to pursue, I would absolutely say go for it. And you don't know, right? Like you said, it doesn't have to be like this is your future career.
Mhm.
It could be an additional, there's a lot of the freelancing, which we started talking about here. A lot of people, workers are making multiple streams of income. It's not just one thing. That is potentially the future. I mean, a lot of people are already doing that, right? So they might have a day job, but they might be getting paid two other ways as well.
Sure.
I knew someone who worked at a bank, then at an insurance company, and he did barbecue. And so he would go to events and he had his roaster and he had his stuff and he just showed up and he loved it. He loved cooking. He loved helping, giving people something great to eat and just the whole entire like the business side of it, right? So it became an additional income source for him.
Yeah.
I think that's a lot of fun.
Yeah.
Streaming, right? Obviously, you've talked about it a lot.
Mhm.
That's like, it's changed everything. Like there's almost too much to watch. Like you go to Netflix and you're like,
no
we end up
kidding.
watching nothing because it's just like endless. And now there's the different apps and it's confusing. It's like, I don't even know where to go sometimes. But I always find it funny when someone says, it's not funny, but they say, you have to watch this. Have you seen this? And all these things. And absolutely. But there's so much. Like if I were to pull my list out of what everything that's been recommended or what I want to watch, what I've come across, I wouldn't have enough time to do any of it. But
Yeah.
how do you manage streaming today?
Oh my God. My lists are nonstop.
Yeah.
It's crazy, right? So you're coming from cable. I'm of the age where I lived where I understood where I didn't have streaming, right? It was all cable TV or nothing. And then I'm into the age of streaming. There's, kids grown up now that don't know that Netflix didn't exist back in the day.
No.
So I'm coming from cable to Netflix, and Netflix and maybe Hulu were like the only games in town. But now streaming is just so fragmented and everybody wants their own streaming service. Every network wants their own streaming service. And we're almost revolting back to almost that cable model, right?
Yeah.
I think I was reading a post or an article the other day and it said, it'd be great if we had just like one app that collected all of these apps together to be able to watch things. And somebody commented, you're literally describing cable TV.
Yeah. Yeah.
I was like, you're literally describing cable TV again. But yeah, I mean, streaming is, who's got the time? the level of prestige TV now is just crazy. It's just
Yeah.
crazy the level of prestige TV that is on nowadays than there was back then. I mean, before you could count on HBO Sunday nights to give you your prestige TV
Yep.
and those highbrow TV shows. Now every streaming service has it.
Yeah.
So my list, obviously, I'm never going to get to the end of it. There's just no way
Yeah.
to be able to watch everything. And then, when you try to narrow things, for me, I try to find food things to watch.
Yeah.
So that does narrow the niche down a little bit. Obviously, because of the podcast, I prioritize those types of
Sure.
shows like Top Chef. I'm definitely watching that. When the new season of The Bear came out this past summer, I was watching it. So I prioritize my interests. I watch those things, and I love like Marvel and comic book and sci-fi stuff. So I'll prioritize those things. But for the most part, it's just, I'll flip through Netflix for like 45 minutes before I just end up watching another episode of Burn Notice.
Yeah.
And another term with streaming that has, I think, started to rise is the comfort watch. You'll do that. You'll flip through, essentially channel flip through Hulu or channel flip through Netflix. And then you just end up watching a show that you watched 100 times before.
Yeah.
And why? Because you know how it starts, you know how it ends, and you usually are doing something else while you're watching TV.
Yeah.
And it's just, it's those comfort shows like comfort food where you'll eat the same meal 100 times because you like it and you know how it's going to taste and it's consistent and you're never going to be let down by that meal or that show. So I think a lot of people have a hard time getting into new shows because they're like, oh man, like HBO Max was canceling stuff left and right. Like who wants to invest their time in a 8 to 10 episode season if you're just going to cancel it after the first season?
Yep.
So I'm finding a lot of people doing comfort watches like The Office. A lot of people are rerunning The Office. Suits this past summer is a great example of comfort watch. I watched Suits when it was back on USA on the cable network. And then when I saw it getting revived this summer, I was kind of watching it in shock. I was like, holy cow, this thing's like from 2015, 10 years ago. And people are just now watching it for the first time. And then some people like me were rewatching it. But people loved Suits because it was what they call blue sky network, blue sky marketing, and everything happened in bright, saturated backgrounds. And it was a multi-season show. It went like 9 seasons. So people could get to know these characters and love them and understand their motivations and see it through to a completion. Whereas now with some TV shows, they're canceled after a season or two. And that's where a lot of people just don't want to invest in that sort of thing. But streaming is just changing the landscape of TV in general. And I'll be interested to see who makes it, who kind of falls, and who ends up consolidating back to the cable TV model, so to speak.
Yeah, so consolidation's coming. It's already happened, I guess, in some regards, but it's also expansion at the same time. So who knows? Yeah, I've been burned with some shows in the past. I think Bloodline was one. And Suits is interesting because it rose to fame. And even I think they were on one of the award shows or something. I just had happened to like change the channel, which people like, what do you mean you changed the channel, right? Like you clicked the new app, you mean? No. I was like flipping through on YouTube TV, of course, which is basically streaming. And then there they are, and they're talking about how they got famous today and how things change. And that is true. Like I didn't watch Breaking Bad in the moment. I watched Breaking Bad some years later. Even Suits going back to it, I was like, turned it on. I heard this, all the rage. And you watch it in the first episode, and he pulls out his phone, and you're like, okay, this show was made prior to, you know what I mean? Like they're not using iPhones, so like they're not even using Blackberries, I don't think.
Yeah.
So like it's just interesting. There's a lot of that stuff that's going on when it comes to TV or shows and watching TV. So like where people watch TV, meaning like on a device, on their phone, on an iPad, on a television. I'll do all of the above, and probably not as much on my phone unless it's in a sporting event and I'm somewhere and I want to like just catch up on it, or I want to see a clip, like maybe more YouTube on my phone.
Yeah.
But I'll watch probably more sporting events and some streaming on an iPad quite a bit, because it's like, it doesn't have to be on a TV. Now, TV gives you the best immersive experience. So if you're going to watch like Maverick or something, it probably plays better on a TV with good sound and all that kind of thing. Where do you watch TV? Where do you consume it?
I consume a lot at home with the TV.
Yeah.
But I kind of have a little bit of, I don't know, ADHD or something. I have like what they call the second screen experience.
Yeah.
So I'll watch something on TV, but then I'm doing something on my phone, like, or I'm answering email, or I'm answering a text, and this is kind of in the background.
Yeah.
So for a show to kind of make me put my phone down and actually watch it, is an indication to me that that's a great show. But I mainly watch at home. I do have a laptop and a computer, and I'll watch on my phone if I'm traveling, obviously.
Yeah.
But the bigger the screen that I can watch it on, the better.
That's
Could be because I'm getting older and my eyesight's getting worse.
Yeah.
But that's just.
I think it's also like it's amazing sometimes that we get to look on these walls like and see these massive TVs with this incredible pictures, and like that didn't exist. Like I remember when the plasma became a big deal, or LCD screens, and you're like, holy cow, look at this. And everyone's comparing the black levels, right? All this kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And nowadays you could go into a family room and there could be kids sitting there. The TV may or may not be on. It almost doesn't matter. And everyone's got their device.
Oh yeah, everybody's on their device. Yeah.
So it's very personalized. Like everyone, I don't want to watch this, or I don't watch that. No, just everyone watches their own thing.
Put in their earbuds and they're watching their own thing. And it's funny when family comes to visit and we're all sitting in the living room and there'll be something on the TV, but everybody's on their phone.
Yeah.
Everybody's either playing a game or watching a TV or scrolling Facebook or something.
Yeah.
So I mean, streaming and entertainment is extremely personalized now. There's something out there for everybody, and you don't have to watch what's on the family room TV. You can kind of watch your own thing.
It'll be soon. They're already given recommendations if you've watched this, but if you're mixing profiles and it becomes difficult, like my wife likes Dateline, all that kind of stuff. I'm I can't be watching too much Dateline. But when is it come to where here's what show you're watching next, right? Like we've got enough of your listening and watching habits. You're going to love this show. And all of a sudden Suits comes on because you've been watching John Grisham movies or whatever. You're like, holy cow, this is amazing. I don't know.
Yeah.
So fascinating times. Couple more quick things I want to get to. Jacksonville.
Sure.
You've brought it up a couple times already. Obviously you're in Savannah, moved a little bit down south. I've driven through Jacksonville. I've been in Jacksonville. I think when we first started talking, I was there for a hockey tournament. Jacksonville has this vibe. It's like, it's a new city. Like they got the Jaguars the same year Carolina Panthers in Charlotte got their football team, right? The second year they're both in their respective championship games, which is crazy. I was from Buffalo, and I don't know how long you follow the Jaguars or pay attention to them, right? All the thing, but like the Bills are playing in a playoff game in Buffalo, and the Jacksonville Jaguars in their second season are coming. And this is pre-internet, right? And you don't really follow teams from outside, like unless they're on ESPN or something. That was it.
Sure.
The Jacksonville Jaguars show up. It's a snowy day, and their buses roll in. This is Jim Kelly back in the days, like some of the best Bills. This is one of the.
Oh yeah.
They're on the back end. This is the fifth year, so they had been in the Super Bowl 4 years in a row. This is their fifth year, I believe. They're not going to the Super Bowl this year, obviously, because they lose to the Jaguars. But anyway, the Jaguars are coming in on their bus. They're throwing snowballs at it. They're shaking the bus, and everyone's like, "Oh my God, the Bills are going to kill them." Jacksonville comes in, kicks a game-winning field goal. Mike Hollis to win the game, and the Bills lose to the Jacksonville Jaguars. I remember Thurman Thomas being like, I don't even know who plays for the Jaguars. So anyway, that goes to show you it was kind of not really on the map because it was just different time. But when I'm in Jacksonville's got some history, right? Like you think it's, this is a brand new city that just popped up one day, and I do not get that vibe at all. And as more time I've spent talking to people from there, and obviously they have a food scene going on. There's a lot of things. It's a bigger city. It's spread out kind of like a Charlotte, and you get to the beaches very easily. So people obviously love it for those reasons. And I'm sure you get a lot of golfers coming down there to visit. So like, what's the overall vibe of Jacksonville from your perspective?
Jacksonville's weird. I mean, above and beyond what Florida weird is, Jacksonville's just kind of its own version of weird. It's a huge city. It's the largest city by land mass. In terms of just the amount of land that is Jacksonville. But I mean, we're close to a million people living here. But it feels small because Jacksonville's made up of a lot of small neighborhoods. Where I used to live in Auburn, Alabama, there was maybe like 2 Publix in the whole city. And here it's like on every corner. I mean, just because Jacksonville's Publix, hometown, but and Winn-Dixie's the same way. But there's a lot of smaller neighborhoods, and for the most part, people kind of stay in their neighborhoods. Like especially the beaches, they'll reference the intercoastal as the ditch, and they're like, "Oh, I never crossed the ditch. I don't ever go into the city." So a lot of people kind of stay in their neighborhoods and don't really venture out. And for me, I've been in Jacksonville for about 10 years now, almost. And there's still swaths of Jacksonville I've never even driven through. I mean, you can drive an hour and a half and still be in Jacksonville. So it's just a huge, huge city. There's, like we were talking about earlier, the food scene, I think, is underrated a lot of the times. The Michelin guide came to Florida recently, but only went to Tampa, Orlando, and Miami. Didn't even stop in Jacksonville. So I was a little disappointed in that. But Jacksonville is really a transient city. We got a couple of military bases here, and a lot of people come through Jacksonville, don't necessarily stay. I don't know a lot of people that have that have been born and raised in Jacksonville. I've talked to a few based on my podcast, but you talk to most people like, oh, are you from Jacksonville? I was like, oh no, I moved here in such and such year, or my husband, my wife's in the military, so we were stationed here. And so it's very much a transient city. It's a very diverse city. The Filipino community, I'm Filipino, and I didn't know until I got here that the Filipino population is the largest in Florida. And for a city our size, I was kind of like, oh man, I didn't know we had such a large Filipino base, but there's no like little Manila. Like, in New York and DC, there's like Chinatown. There's a large population of Asians and Chinese. So they have their place. In Miami, there's Little Havana, a lot of Cubans down there. But here, with a large Filipino population, there's not really a little Manila where people can go and get like really great Filipino food. I mean, there is great Filipino food, don't get me wrong, but it's all spread out all over the city. But there's not really an area here. So one of my podcast series I'm going to be doing that's kind of in the hopper is the search for Jacksonville's food identity, because we don't have one. We're bordered by an ocean. There's a river that splits Jacksonville kind of right down the middle. So you would think we would be known for seafood, but not so much. There isn't a food or a cuisine that says this is Jacksonville, right? There's no deep dish pizza type of identity. When you say deep dish pizza, you automatically think Chicago. Or when you say a Cuban, you think Miami or Tampa.
Right.
When you think of key lime pie, you think of Key West. You think of barbecue, you think of, Atlanta, Kansas City, North Carolina.
Yeah.
So Jacksonville doesn't have kind of that food identity. So I had the opportunity to talk to some food writers here, some food historians. I talked to John T. Edge, who's host of the True South TV show on SEC Network, and it airs on ESPN, that travels all over the South. Got a chance to talk to him. I was like, what do you think the search for, or what do you think Jacksonville's food identity is? And so really interesting interviews there, and different people's takes on what they think the cultural food identity is of Jacksonville.
Yeah.
So that'll be coming out soon, probably after my Top Chef episodic recaps, because those are kind of taking up all my time.
Yeah.
Yeah, so Jacksonville, I moved here 10 years ago. I love it. Like I said, the beach is right here. I don't ever go. It's kind of one of those things. It's like, for the first few months, we were going to the beach like every weekend. But after a while, it's like, it'll be there. It'll be there when it's there, right?
Yeah.
So I probably don't take advantage of the beach so much, but there's a lot to do here. There's a lot to do in the city, and I enjoy it. The weather's great, except during hurricane season can get a little sketchy. But for the most part, I've loved living here. Enjoy it. That's kind of Jacksonville in a nutshell.
That's it. If there was going to be like a food identity in Jacksonville, like maybe it doesn't exist there right now, like do you see a direction? It's like, I think this could be it.
I will say Jacksonville is a sandwich eating town.
Yeah.
I think Jacksonville's probably a little bit more blue collar than people think. So sandwiches are really popular here. There's a particular sandwich here that's very popular called a desert rider or a camel rider.
Okay.
It sounds kind of racist and pejorative, but it's basically a pita bread, and it's stuffed with cold cuts and onions and tomatoes and Italian dressing, and people love it. There are chains of places that sell camel riders all over the city of Jacksonville.
Okay.
Never heard of it until I got here, but there's also a large, Arab American population that kind of brought their sensibilities here to what was available, right? You just think about it, it's just a cold cut sandwich, but I've had one recently and it was fantastic.
Yeah.
So a lot of people think, that's uniquely Jacksonville, and it really is, because I've never seen it outside of here.
Yeah.
So that's one thing. I live near Mayport, which is a neighborhood by the beach. It's where one of the naval stations is located. And Mayport's known for their shrimp. Is this shrimp any different than you would catch anywhere else? Not really.
Right.
It doesn't taste anything different, but it's just local here. It's an industry here.
Yeah.
So Mayport shrimp's very popular in this area. As far as that goes, I mean, that's kind of why I'm doing this podcast series. Like, what else is Jacksonville known for? I mean, we have seafood, but nobody says, hey, come to Jacksonville for seafood. That to me is weird, but nobody else thinks it's weird. It's just the way it is.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think if I had to nail it down, those two things, I think the camel rider sandwiches and Mayport shrimp, I think are two of the big things in Jacksonville that maybe the Chamber of Commerce could really put their marketing dollars behind and say, hey, come to Jacksonville for this. You're not going to get it anywhere else.
I'm in. The fact that you can eat local shrimp, like you can do that in a lot of different places up and down the coast. But at the same time, you can still do it in Jacksonville, right? So that's a good thing. And that would be useful. And then the camel rider you talk about, like I'm in. Yeah, like I would definitely have that. And that would be unique to the area. So I think you got it. That's the
camel rider with a cherry limeade is the combo meal you want to get down here.
See, that's what I'm saying. Then you start throwing the drinks into it. Like in Buffalo, they have Loganberry, which is like, what is Loganberry? And you go there and you get your hot dog or you get your beef on weck and you add a Loganberry to it. Obviously, chicken wings are a big deal, but food identity in these cities is like I was in Philadelphia recently, but I was only in the airport. So I was like, when in Rome, there's like cheesesteak places everywhere. It's like, I'm obviously having one right before a plane ride.
Exactly.
Like that's the thing to do, but you're going to do it. And so that's a thing that you would do in Jacksonville. So I'm all in.
Yeah.
Rich, this has been awesome. Eat Your Content. Where do people find it? Where do they learn more about you?
Yeah. Eat Your Content's available on most podcasting platforms, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Amazon Music. I just recently got on YouTube. Took me forever to get onto it. I just thought, do I have the time to edit videos and stuff? But yeah, I'm finding time. So I got YouTube now. I'm posting some of my old episodes in video format. I kept the interview videos and I'm uploading those now. So you can catch me there. I'm on all social media platforms, Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, at Rich Herrera, at Eat Your Content. So you can follow there and be notified of when new episodes drop.
It's awesome. Rich, been awesome, man. I appreciate it. Good talking with you. Always like talking to people who are doing creative things and you're doing it. So thank you.
Yeah, man. Thanks. Appreciate it.
In case you haven't noticed, we love podcasts. In fact, we love building podcasts, everything from development to production. Because of all that, we're building a one-of-a-kind podcast network. If you have a podcast or looking to launch a new podcast, then we should talk. You can message me on Twitter at Eric_Kaz or hit us up any way that works for you. Let's talk about your podcast joining this one-of-a-kind podcast network.